My mind was still clouded from the sleepless nights. The constant tension between caring for our newborn daughter and trying to keep my marriage from completely falling apart. I had been running on fumes for weeks. No sleep, no energy, and certainly no patience for Blake's increasingly distant behavior. He would come home late, talking about work, but never really looking at me. I kept wondering if he could see the exhaustion on my face, but the truth was, I wasn't sure I cared anymore. Then, one night, it happened. He sat down across from me at the kitchen table, a strange, almost clinical look in his eyes. I'd been giving him the space he seemed to need, though I felt that silence between us had grown suffocating. He started talking about how hard things had been for him, how he just couldn't get his head straight with everything going on. I had no idea what he was about to say, but I knew something was off. "I need to be honest with you," Blake said, his voice strained, as if the words he was about to speak were choking him. "I cheated on you." My stomach dropped, and I felt the room spin as if the floor beneath me was suddenly unstable. His words didn't make sense. I couldn't catch my breath. He couldn't possibly mean what I thought he meant. I didn't say anything right away. I couldn't. I just stared at him, my heart pounding, waiting for him to say more, to make it make sense. But he didn't offer an explanation at first. Instead, he stared back at me, looking strangely relieved, as if confessing to a crime would make him feel better, like he was getting something off his chest. "Who?" I managed to ask, the only question that seemed to matter. It was the only question I could even think to ask. His lips trembled. "Megan," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't need to ask for more details. I already knew who Megan was, his coworker, the one he had been spending more time with lately. The one I'd caught him texting in the middle of the night. The one he swore was just a friend. But this was something I had never expected. The words he had just spoken echoed in my mind, and I couldn't seem to escape them. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't believe that the man I had married, the man I had trusted, had been lying to me, had been betraying me while I struggled through the hardest physical and emotional time of my life. Then came the part that I couldn't get out of my head. The part that still echoed in the silence of the room. Blake shifted in his chair, like he was trying to explain away his actions, to somehow make them sound less horrible. "You know, it's not personal," he continued, as if his betrayal could be explained away so easily. "Male biology isn't designed to witness birth. It triggers this protective response. It kills sexual attraction. I've researched it." I blinked, trying to process his words. It felt like a punch in the stomach. The most twisted justification I could have ever imagined. The absurdity of it, the sheer cruelty, left me speechless for a moment. I couldn't help it. I let out a bitter laugh, but it wasn't funny. It was just a raw, empty sound, a sound that expressed everything I was feeling in that moment. The contempt, the betrayal, the anger. "Blake," I finally managed, my voice shaky but steady. "You're telling me you cheated, because watching me give birth made you not attracted to me anymore." I could barely get the words out. I couldn't even look at him, but I had to say it, had to make it real. He nodded, his face twisted with what I could only describe as discomfort, but not guilt. Not shame. He wasn't sorry. He was just uncomfortable with the situation. The absurdity of it hit me like a wave, and I suddenly felt like I was drowning in this twisted reality. He continued, his words floating in the air, like they didn't matter. "I'm trying to make this work, despite my biological repulsion. I've been honest with you. Most men would just leave. I'm still here. I'm trying to fix things." And there it was, the unspoken truth. His justification wasn't about me or our marriage. It was about him and his discomfort, his fragile ego, and his inability to handle the reality of fatherhood, of intimacy, of commitment. My body, the one that had brought our daughter into the world, had somehow become an object of disgust to him. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw something at him. But instead, I sat there, frozen, unable to move, unable to process the words that had just shattered my world. The silence between us stretched on, filled with all the things he had never said, all the things I would never hear from him. Blake didn't try to apologize or offer any more excuses. He just sat there, waiting for me to react. But how could I? How could I find the words when everything I had known about our relationship had just crumbled into dust? Finally, I spoke, the words barely audible, but they felt heavy. "You think you're doing me a favor by being honest," I whispered, staring at him with a mixture of disbelief and fury. "You think you're fixing this by telling me you're disgusted by me." He didn't answer, but I didn't need him to. I already knew the truth. Blake was beyond saving, and so was the marriage I had fought so hard to preserve. I didn't know what I expected after Blake's confession. Some part of me thought that if he finally admitted it, things might start to make sense. Maybe he would say he regretted it. Maybe he would cry. But he didn't. He just sat there, looking at me, waiting for my reaction. The problem was, I didn't know how to react. Part of me wanted to scream. Part of me just wanted to disappear. But the thing that haunted me the most was the look on his face. The same look he had when he came home late. The same look he wore when I caught him texting Megan in the middle of the night. I spent the next few days in a daze. Every time I tried to focus on our daughter, on the tiny little life I was trying to raise, the anger and the betrayal surged back. My mind would drift back to Blake's words, "It's not personal, and I'm trying to make this work despite my biological repulsion." My hands would shake as I fed our daughter, the weight of his cruel justification hovering over me like a cloud I couldn't shake. Blake kept talking, kept trying to explain. He would come home every night, his eyes downcast, and mutter about how he was trying to fix things. But each apology felt more like a burden than a balm. It was clear he wasn't sorry about the affair. He was sorry he got caught. Sorry I wasn't the woman he could continue manipulating. I caught him glancing at Megan's texts when he thought I wasn't looking. He wasn't hiding it anymore, as if everything had shifted into a strange, unbearable normalcy. It became a ritual of sorts. Each night, after he came home from his work, he would talk about how hard things were for him, about how much he was trying. But it wasn't about me. It wasn't about our daughter. It was about his guilt, his discomfort. Blake would sit on the edge of the bed, talking in circles about how our relationship had become unhealthy, how he needed space, as if the only thing that mattered was his need to escape the reality of what he had done. I kept playing the same scenario over and over in my head, like a broken record. I thought about the time before everything had gone so wrong. I thought about the way Blake used to look at me, the way we used to laugh together, the quiet moments when we held hands or shared our dreams for the future. Now, those memories felt like a lifetime ago, like they belonged to someone else, someone who wasn't crushed under the weight of betrayal. I started noticing the small things, the way Blake's eyes didn't linger on me anymore, how he seemed to shrink when our daughter was crying, the way he would disappear into the guest room while I stayed up, nursing, crying, and trying to put together a life that didn't make me feel like a broken shell of the woman I used to be. There were nights when I stayed up late, scrolling through Megan's social media, trying to piece together the timeline of their affair. I hated myself for doing it, but the truth was, I was desperate. I needed something solid, something I could hold on to. The truth was slipping through my fingers, like sand in the wind, and I wanted to know where it had gone. Every post, every picture, every comment between them felt like a slap in the face. But I couldn't stop myself. I wanted to know. I had to know. And with every detail I uncovered, the wound that had opened inside me grew wider. I had nothing left to cling to except my anger. The more I learned, the more furious I became. I started making a list, things Blake had done, things he had said. I would jot them down late at night, when the house was quiet, when our daughter was asleep, and Blake was still locked away in the guest room. The affair had started 3 weeks after our daughter was born, at a time when I was bleeding, nursing, exhausted beyond belief, and trying to keep everything together. 3 weeks. I kept seeing that number in my head, 3 weeks. And I kept wondering how long Blake had been sleeping with her. How many times he had chosen Megan over me. How many nights I had spent alone, crying into the sheets. And that thought, that he had been with her, so soon after our daughter was born, after all we had been through, it crushed me. One evening, Blake came home late, his eyes red like he had been crying. But there was no apology, no remorse. He just stood there in the doorway, looking like a stranger. It was the first time I realized how much of a stranger he had become. He had no idea what I was going through. He had no idea what it felt like to be a mother, to be abandoned by the person you trusted the most, to feel your body fail you, to feel disgusting, to feel broken. He didn't get it. He never did, and he never would. That night, I sat on the edge of the bed, listening to him talk about how difficult everything had been for him, how he was trying and how he didn't want to lose me. His words were hollow, empty promises that had long since lost their meaning. I could hear the desperation in his voice, but it didn't move me. It didn't reach me. I was beyond that. I had already made a decision. When he asked if we could talk to figure out how to fix things, I looked at him, really looked at him for the first time in weeks. I thought about everything: the affair, his cruelty, the way he had abandoned me and our daughter, the way he had used his so-called biological repulsion as an excuse to hurt me. I'm pregnant. I thought about how my body had been the battleground for everything, the starting point of his betrayal, the reason for his self-pity, and the symbol of my broken marriage. And I knew it deep down. I had to do something. I couldn't just sit there, pretending everything would magically work out because, as Blake decided, he was sorry. He wasn't sorry. He wasn't even close. So, I started thinking. No, I started planning. It wasn't enough to just leave him. I wanted him to feel what he had done. I wanted everyone to know the truth, to see him for what he really was: a man who would betray his wife when she needed him the most, who would justify his cruelty with twisted logic and fake science. He had to be exposed. It wasn't just the affair. It wasn't even just the fact that he had abandoned me at my lowest. It was the way he looked at me now. The disgust in his eyes when he saw my body, when he talked about the birth. It was as if everything I had done, everything we had done together, was worth nothing. I wasn't the woman he loved anymore. I was just a body, a vessel, something to be discarded the moment it stopped being desirable to him. But I wasn't going to let him get away with it. No, I had a plan. And it started with Blake's career. I knew Blake's company was about to launch a new surgical device, one he had been preparing for months. He was going to be the one to present it, the star of the show, in front of executives, potential clients, the whole industry. This was going to be his moment. The moment he would solidify his place in the company. The moment that would bring him a massive promotion. He had been talking about it nonstop, rehearsing his speech, practicing his lines about how birth was a miracle and we should respect the female body. His words, his lies, they sickened me. But I knew they would work, and that's exactly why I had to act. I started making calls. I found out who was going to be in the audience, who would be there to see him fail. I dug through the company directory, found names, faces, connections. And then, I found Jenny. Jenny was married to Blake's boss. I had met her once or twice at company events. And I knew she had her own traumatic birth experience. She had told me about it in passing: emergency cesarean, weeks in recovery, the usual, nothing extraordinary except that it had clearly left a mark on her. That was my in. That was my chance. I called her. I had to make sure she understood. I had to make sure she knew exactly what Blake had said about me, about my body, about the birth, about how disgusted he was. I had to make her realize that Blake wasn't the victim in all this. Jenny was horrified. She hadn't known. She didn't even know about Megan. When I told her everything, she was quiet for a long time. And then she said it. She said the words I needed to hear. "I'll help you. I'll make sure he answers for this." The plan was set. The day of the presentation, I watched from home, holding our daughter in my arms as I watched the live stream. Blake had no idea what was coming. His voice was confident at first, the usual rehearsed words, the usual speeches about the beauty of childbirth, the miracle of life. He was nailing it, I could hear it in his voice. I could almost feel the applause he was waiting for. But it wasn't going to be applause. It was going to be something far more powerful. When Jenny stood up in the middle of the Q&A, I felt my pulse quicken. I had been waiting for this moment, the moment where Blake would be forced to confront everything he had done to me. "Mr. Blake," Jenny began, her voice calm but sharp. "You spoke beautifully about respecting the birth process. Can you share any personal experience with childbirth that informs your perspective?" Blake froze. It was almost laughable how easily he was caught off guard. His face went pale, and I could see him desperately searching for words, for a way out. But there was no way out. Jenny wasn't going to let him off the hook. Not now, not ever. The room fell silent, and I felt my heart race. I could hear his voice crack as he stammered about respecting patient privacy, about how he didn't feel comfortable discussing his personal experience with childbirth. He was floundering, stumbling over his words, trying to backpedal, but it was too late. Everyone could see it. The cracks were already starting to show. His carefully constructed image was falling apart, piece by piece. Jenny didn't let up. She stood there, watching him squirm, her words cutting through the silence and mar. "Blake, can you tell us how you reconciled your beautiful speech about the miracle of birth with your actual feelings about the process?" Blake's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, but nothing came out. I watched him crumble on the screen, knowing exactly what was happening in that room. I felt a twisted satisfaction, a surge of power that I couldn't explain. He was trapped, and he knew it. The audience sat in stunned silence, but I could tell they were already drawing conclusions. Jenny was laying the groundwork for everyone to see Blake for who he really was. His smug, polished exterior was shattering, and nothing was going to save him now. Blake tried to laugh it off, but it sounded forced. He could barely string together a coherent thought. He kept looking at his boss, at Raymond, at the audience, his eyes wide with panic. But nobody was buying it. He had already lost them. Jenny didn't stop there. She asked the killer question, the one that would seal his fate. "Mr. Blake, do you have children?" Blake was shaking by now, and his response was barely audible. He couldn't even answer her properly. The words came out slow, strained, as if he were trying to pretend he wasn't sinking in the quicksand of his own lies. "Yes," he finally said, barely a whisper. "A 4-month-old daughter." Jenny didn't let it go. 4 months, she repeated, her voice piercing the tension. "You were present for her birth, weren't you?" Blake's face was white, his hands shaking, but he nodded. His eyes were darting around the room, desperate for an escape that didn't exist. Jenny asked one more question, the one that finally broke him. "How did that experience shape your respect for the female body and the birth process?" His mouth opened, but no words came out. I saw it all through the screen. I saw him realize, too late, that there was no way to salvage his dignity. There was no spin, no excuse, no way to make it look better. His career, his reputation, his carefully crafted image, it was all gone. I watched Blake stumble through the rest of the presentation, his voice shaking, his hands gripping the podium, like it was the only thing holding him up. The presentation was flawless. But it didn't matter. Not anymore. The damage had been done. When he finished, the applause was polite, but it was hollow. There was no enthusiasm, no respect, just pity. Blake rushed off stage, his face pale, his body stiff with humiliation. He couldn't even look his boss in the eye as he walked past him. I watched it all, feeling a cold satisfaction settle in my chest. He had been exposed for the fraud he was, and the world knew. I sat there, holding our daughter, a strange calm sweeping over me. For the first time in months, I felt like I had control again. I had done it. I had won. The days after the presentation were a blur. I couldn't stop replaying that moment over and over in my mind. Blake, trapped, exposed in front of hundreds of people. His carefully crafted persona crumbling in an instant. It felt like a victory, but not the kind I thought it would be. It wasn't the triumphant satisfaction I imagined when I first started planning this. No, it felt colder than I expected. More final. Blake didn't come home that night. He didn't come home the next night either. I wasn't sure what to make of it, but a part of me, maybe the part that was still married to him, felt that odd itch in my chest. I told myself I didn't care, but that ache wouldn't go away. When he finally walked through the door, 3 days later, his eyes were hollow, his shoulders slumped. He looked like a man who had just lost everything. The man who walked through the door wasn't the Blake I had known. The Blake who had always had an answer, always had a reason, always managed to spin things in his favor. This Blake didn't even know how to look at me. I didn't have to say anything at first. He just stood there in the entryway, holding his jacket, his tie askew. I could see the shame on his face, the way he was avoiding eye contact, the way his hands trembled slightly. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The silence between us was thick with everything that had happened. The affair, the lies, the public humiliation. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he managed to speak. I didn't expect it to go like that. The Kuen? I froze. I couldn't. I didn't think she would ask me like that. It wasn't fair. His voice was weak, almost pleading. I didn't feel the satisfaction I thought I would. I thought I'd be angry, furious. Instead, I just felt empty. Empty and cold. I didn't do anything wrong, he continued, his voice growing more desperate. You don't get it. It was never about you. It was about... I don't know. But it wasn't about you, Carla. I couldn't listen to him anymore. I turned away and walked to the other side of the room. I couldn't even look at him. Every time he spoke, it was like he was digging the knife deeper. He wanted sympathy, but all I could feel was contempt. This man, the one who swore he loved me, the one who had promised me everything, had betrayed me at my lowest. I didn't owe him anything. You don't get it, do you? I said, my voice shaking. It wasn't about what you saw during childbirth. It wasn't about your biological repulsion. It was about how you treated me, Blake. How you discarded me when I needed you the most. You weren't there for me. You never were. His face twisted as if my words were physically hitting him. He looked pained, but I didn't care. It wasn't about him anymore. It was about me, about what had to go through. I had carried his child. I had gone through hell, and he had been off sleeping with someone else. I was supposed to be his partner, and he had been sleeping with someone else. I'm sorry, he whispered. I am. I never meant to hurt you. I laughed, a bitter sound that wasn't even close to humor. Sorry. Sorry doesn't fix this, Blake. Sorry doesn't erase everything you've done. Sorry doesn't make up for the last few months. No, the last few years. You haven't even tried. You never tried. He stepped forward, his hand reaching out, but I stepped back. I wasn't ready for him to touch me again, not after everything. Not after he had put me through all of this. I'm trying now, he said, his voice breaking. I'm here now, Carla. I want to make this work. I don't need you to try, Blake. I shot back, my words sharp, like a blade. I need you to have been there. When I needed you. Not now. Not after I've already done everything myself. You weren't there, Blake. You chose Megan. You chose your career. You chose anything but me. He flinched as if my words physically hurt him, but I didn't stop. The anger I had been holding back for so long finally broke free, like a dam bursting open. I'm not the one who has to make this work, I said, my voice low and deadly calm. I'm done. I'm done trying to fix something that was broken from the start. I don't need you, Blake. I never needed you to fix me. I needed you to be here. But you weren't. So don't stand there and tell me you're trying now. Because it's too late. For a long time, we stood in silence. Blake's eyes were full of regret, but I didn't care anymore. The only thing I cared about now was my daughter. My daughter, who was growing up in a house where lies and betrayal were the norm. I couldn't let that be the life she knew. "I'm filing for divorce," I said, the words slipping out like a breath I'd been holding for months. "Tomorrow. I'll have everything ready. I won't make this any harder than it has to be. But it's over." Blake's face crumpled as if I had just shattered him, and maybe I had. But it didn't matter anymore. His tears, his apologies, they were meaningless. "You don't mean that," he whispered, his voice a broken wreck. "Please, Carla. Please don't do this. Don't take our family away from me. You took it away when you decided to destroy everything I ever believed in," I said, the words bitter and final. "You took it away when you chose someone else over us." Blake sank to his knees and I turned away. I couldn't look at him anymore. I couldn't stand the sight of his regret. I had to move on. For myself, for my daughter. "I'm done," I repeated, the finality of the words hanging in the air. "I'm done with you." I walked away from him, from everything he had ever promised me, and I knew, deep down, that there was no going back. The days after I told Blake it was over felt like a fog I couldn't escape. I wasn't sure if I was living in a dream or a nightmare. I'm pregnant. There were moments where I felt a strange peace, like I was free for the first time in years, and then other moments when the weight of it all would crash down on me. I'd find myself staring at our daughter, watching her sleep, and wonder what kind of world I was bringing her up in. A world where her father had abandoned her, where I had to pick up the pieces. Blake tried to call me the next day and the day after that. His messages were full of desperation, but I ignored them. I had nothing left to say to him. His apology was too little, too late. He could say whatever he wanted, but the truth was, he had already shown me who he was. And who he was wasn't someone I wanted to share a life with. But even though I wasn't responding, I could feel the shift. I could feel the pressure of what was coming. Blake's absence was suffocating in a different way now. It was one thing to live with him, even when he was emotionally distant. But living without him, knowing he was out there, trying to salvage his career and his reputation, made everything feel worse. It didn't help that I had to see him at the company events, the ones where I would drop off our daughter for his visits. He would be there, looking like he hadn't slept in days, his face drawn and hollow. But there was nothing in his eyes that showed any remorse. He had no idea how to be a father, no idea what it really meant to sacrifice, to give everything for someone else. He had only ever thought about himself. One afternoon, I ran into Jenny at a coffee shop. She was alone, sipping a latte, looking every bit the professional I had come to admire. She smiled when she saw me, that same empathetic smile she had when we first talked about everything. "Hey," she said, motioning to the chair across from her. "Mind if I join you?" I nodded, sinking into the chair. I hadn't seen Jenny much since the whole presentation fiasco, and though she had helped me in ways that were almost impossible to articulate, I still felt like I had unfinished business to deal with. And as strange as it felt, talking to her, someone who truly understood, was a small comfort. "Blake's a mess," she said, taking a sip of her coffee. "He's been calling me, asking for advice, for help. He's practically begging anyone who'll listen." I leaned back in my chair, trying to hide the bitterness I felt. "I don't care," I said quietly. He had every chance to fix this. He chose his career, his ego, over his family. He chose Megan. Jenny watched me for a long time, her gaze soft but piercing. "I know. But what happened to you? It's not just about him, you know. It's about how we respond to things like this. How we decide to move forward." I nodded, her words sinking in like they always did. She had a way of making me think, making me question my own choices. "He's so damn entitled," I said, frustration building up again. "It's like he thinks this is all some kind of game. Like he can just mess everything up and expect me to forgive him. He doesn't understand the damage he's done. He's so consumed with himself that he can't even see how much he's hurt me. And our daughter." Jenny reached across the table, placing a hand on mine. It was a small gesture, but it felt like a lifeline. "You're doing the right thing," she said. "You're choosing yourself now. And that's not easy. But you're strong. You'll be okay. I exhaled, feeling the weight of her words. I hadn't realized how much I needed that reassurance. How much I needed someone to remind me that I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't wrong for wanting to walk away. I've been thinking about the divorce. And what happens after, I said, my voice low. I want him to be a father to our daughter. I want him to step up. But I don't know if I can trust him. Jenny squeezed my hand. Trust isn't something that can be rebuilt overnight. He's going to have to prove himself. And even then, you don't owe him anything. Your daughter deserves a father, but she also deserves someone who will be there for her. Who will show up, not just show up when it's convenient for his image. I nodded, my heart heavy. I knew she was right. Blake had to prove he could be a father. But that didn't mean I had to make it easy for him. He had to earn it. I wasn't just handing him a relationship with our daughter because he decided he wanted one. I spent the next few days getting everything in order, documentation, evidence, everything I had kept to build my case for the divorce. I wasn't going to let Blake manipulate me anymore. I was done. I had to move forward, for our daughter. It was almost surreal, the way everything started to fall into place. The moment I had decided I was done, truly done, was the moment I began to feel lighter. It was like I had been holding my breath for so long. And now I was finally exhaling. Blake called again, of course, but this time, when I picked up the phone, I didn't feel that same desperation to talk to him. I didn't need him to explain himself anymore. I didn't need his lies or his half-assed apologies. I'm filing, I told him, my voice steady. I'm done. There was a pause on the other end, then a desperate, almost pleading tone. Carla, please, we can fix this. Just give me a chance. No, I said, finally feeling that finality. You don't get a chance anymore. You've had your chance. And you threw it away. I hung up the phone before he could say anything else. For the first time in a long time, I felt a small surge of power. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about making him suffer. It was about me. It was about moving forward, reclaiming my life, and not letting him define who I was anymore. The divorce papers would be filed. And when they were, I would be free. The divorce papers were filed. I had done it. I had made the choice that would change everything, and yet, it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a necessary evil. Like I had been carrying around this heavy weight for months, and now that it was finally gone, I wasn't sure what to do with myself. I had prepared for everything, gathered evidence, contacted lawyers, set the foundation for what was to come. But now that it was all real, the silence between Blake and me felt suffocating. I hadn't heard from him for a few days after I'd filed. At first, I thought it was a good sign. Maybe he had finally accepted it. Maybe he was processing everything. But then, I saw the look on his face when he showed up to pick up our daughter for his visit. His eyes were red, and his shoulders were slumped, like he had just been through the ringer. The facade was gone, and what was left was a broken man who was no longer in control of his own life. I stood there, watching him try to pull himself together, watching him struggle to maintain some semblance of dignity. He wasn't the man I had married. He wasn't even the man I had tried to fight for. He was a shell of himself, and I could see it, even through his weak attempts to smile. Carla, he said quietly, his voice rough, I need to talk to you. Please. I wasn't sure what he wanted. I wasn't sure what more he could say. But I nodded, leading him into the living room. I sat down on the couch, keeping a safe distance between us. I wasn't ready for him to get too close. Not yet. I know I've messed everything up, he started, his eyes downcast. But I want to make this right. I know I haven't been there. I know I've hurt you. I've hurt us. But I want to try. For the sake of our daughter, please. His words were empty. I knew they were. It was the same damn speech, just with different words. The same desperate plea for forgiveness, for reconciliation. And it wasn't enough. Not anymore. You had your chance, I said, my voice steady but cold. You've had it so many chances. And you've thrown every single one of them away. I can't do this anymore. I can't keep hoping you'll change. I can't keep waiting for you to see what you've done." He flinched at my words, but there was nothing in his eyes that told me he understood. He still wasn't getting it. He still thought he could fix this with a few tearful apologies and a promise to try harder. "I'm not asking you to fix anything," I continued. "I'm asking you to leave me alone. I'm asking you to stop pretending like we can go back. We can't. You've destroyed everything. And now, you want to pretend like it didn't happen. Like it's just going to magically get better." He shook his head, his voice getting louder now, as if he were trying to convince himself more than me. "No, Carla, I'm really trying. I am. I'm trying to figure out how to be a father again. How to fix what I've broken." He paused, his hands trembling. "Please. I don't want to lose her. I don't want to lose you. I'm sorry for what I did. I'll do whatever it takes." I looked at him, really looked at him. And for the first time, I saw him for what he was, a man who was still trying to control everything around him, even as his life fell apart. It wasn't about our daughter. It wasn't even about me. It was about Blake trying to salvage what little control he had left. "You don't get to make demands anymore," I said, my voice soft but firm. "You don't get to tell me what's best for me or for our daughter. You lost that right when you decided to destroy everything. And I'm done. I'm done trying to fix you. I'm done trying to fix this marriage. It's over, Blake." I could see the devastation in his eyes. I could see the way his whole body sagged with the weight of my words. And part of me, I'll admit it, part of me felt guilty. But then I remembered everything he had done. I remembered how he had looked at me when I was at my most vulnerable, when I had just given birth, when I was recovering, when I needed him the most. And I remembered how he had betrayed me. He tried again, this time reaching for my hand, but I pulled it back. I couldn't let him touch me anymore. I couldn't let him manipulate me into feeling sorry for him. "Please, Carla," he said again, his voice breaking. "Please, just one more chance. I know I can do better. I will do better, you'll see." I shook my head. "No, Blake. You don't understand. It's not about you anymore. It's about me. It's about our daughter. I don't care if you do better or not. I don't care about your promises. I care about the reality, and the reality is you've been absent. You've been cruel, and you can't just fix that with a few empty words." I stood up then, feeling the weight of the decision I had already made. It wasn't easy, but it was the only way. "I'm not giving you a chance, Blake. Not for me. Not for you. And certainly not for us." He stood there, staring at me, and for a moment, I thought he might finally understand. But then he just nodded, his face drawn in defeat. "I'll go," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I'll go, but I just want you to know I'm sorry. I'm really sorry, Carla." I didn't respond. I just walked to the door and opened it for him. I didn't look back as he left. I didn't need to. I had made my peace with it. I closed the door behind him and leaned against it, taking a deep breath. It was done. I was done. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe again. It's funny how life moves forward when you least expect it. I never thought I'd be the one to move on, not after everything. After Blake. But here I was, a few weeks after the divorce was filed, sitting in a coffee shop, alone. My daughter was with Blake for one of his scheduled visits. And for the first time in months, I had a few hours to myself. The weight that had once crushed me was slowly lifting. It wasn't easy. There were still moments when I'd catch myself waiting for Blake to come through the door. Still moments when I'd feel the old ache in my chest, like a phantom limb that hadn't fully healed. But it was getting easier. And it felt like I was finally waking up from a nightmare I had been stuck in for too long. I didn't know what I was supposed to feel: relief, anger, or maybe just numbness. It wasn't all wrapped up in a neat package of emotion, not yet. I wasn't healed, but I wasn't moving, and that was enough for now. I didn't think I could ever forgive Blake for what he did. Maybe I never would, but I had to keep moving. For my daughter, for myself. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let this define me anymore. I was done being the victim, done letting the betrayal hang over me like a cloud. I was going to take control, and I was going to rebuild my life, brick by brick. I found a part-time job doing data entry for a medical billing company. It wasn't glamorous, but it was something. It was mine. And after everything that had happened, it felt good to have something that was just for me. Something that didn't involve Blake, or Megan, or any of the mess they had created. I could focus on my daughter, on rebuilding myself, and maybe even on finding a life that wasn't tied to the wreckage of my past marriage. It wasn't a lot of money. It wasn't going to change the world. But it was a start, and that meant everything to me. Blake wasn't taking things well. He kept texting me, asking about the custody arrangements, asking when he could see our daughter again. He was trying so hard to make it seem like he was the one trying, the one putting in the effort. But I could see through it. He was still trying to control the narrative, still trying to make me feel guilty for his mistakes. I didn't answer most of his texts. I couldn't. I had to protect myself, protect my peace. If he wanted to be a father, he had to prove it. And if that meant he had to swallow his pride and deal with the consequences of his actions, then so be it. There were nights when I sat alone in the quiet of my apartment, my daughter asleep in her crib, and I would wonder if I had made the right choice. If I had been too hard on Blake, too quick to throw away everything we had built. But then I'd remember the way he looked at me during those last months. The disgust, the emotional abandonment. I wasn't being hard on him. I was being strong for myself and for our daughter. I started going back to therapy, a suggestion from Jenny. She'd been encouraging me to do it for weeks, and I finally took the leap. Sitting in that small office, talking to Savannah, it felt like I was doing something real, something tangible for my own healing. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was beginning to grow again. Savannah was a good listener, and she didn't push me too hard. She let me talk about everything, the divorce, the betrayal, the anger, the guilt, and helped me process it in ways that felt manageable. There were days when I felt like I was drowning in my emotions, but with Savannah's help, I was starting to find solid ground again. The hardest part was realizing how much I had sacrificed, how much of myself I had given up in my marriage to Blake. How I had lost sight of who I was in the process. I wasn't just Blake's wife. I was May, and I had forgotten that. But with each therapy session, I was starting to remember. I was starting to reclaim the parts of me that had been buried for so long. One day, I took a deep breath, stood in front of the mirror, and looked at myself. Really looked. I didn't see the broken woman who had been discarded. I didn't see the woman Blake had made me feel like. I saw strength. I saw resilience. I saw a woman who had been through hell and had come out the other side. I wasn't perfect, but I was getting there. When Blake came to pick up our daughter again, things were different. The anger between us was still there, simmering beneath the surface, but it wasn't consuming me anymore. I had the upper hand now. And I wasn't going to let him manipulate me again. He looked at me as if he was trying to gauge my mood. But I wasn't going to give him that satisfaction. I wasn't going to let him see my vulnerability anymore. I had learned the hard way that if I didn't put up boundaries, he would just keep pushing, keep testing me. I handed him our daughter without saying much. He looked at me, his eyes softening for just a second, but I didn't flinch. I had no use for the man he was now, the man who couldn't even be there for me when I needed him most. "Take care of her," I said, my voice steady. "And if you want to be in her life, you have to show up, not just when it's convenient for you." Blake nodded silently, taking her in his arms. I watched him for a moment, the man who had once been my partner, now just a stranger who shared our child. I wasn't angry anymore. I had nothing left to give him. All that mattered now was our daughter. As he walked out the door, I closed it behind him. The finality of it hit me again, but this time, it didn't hurt. This time, it felt like relief. I was moving on. I was finally starting to live for Maeve. And that was enough. The finalization of the divorce was anticlimactic, and I felt a strange mix of relief and emptiness. When I walked into Dawn's office to sign the final papers, I wasn't sure what I expected. Maybe a sense of victory, or at least a sense of peace. But all I felt was exhaustion. I had fought so hard for this moment, for this freedom. But the weight of it, the weight of everything that had happened, was still there, pressing down on me. Dawn handed me the papers with a professional smile. But I could tell she understood. She didn't rush me. She didn't try to tell me everything was going to be okay, like everyone else had. She just let me sit there for a moment, signing the papers with a hand that still felt shaky despite the resolve inside me. Blake's lawyer had agreed to the terms, and it was over. The custody schedule was set, and I had primary custody, with visitation for Blake that would start with supervised visits. It was fair. It was just. But nothing could change what had happened. Nothing could change the fact that Blake had destroyed us, destroyed the family I had tried so desperately to hold together. I thought I'd feel empowered, but instead, I felt like I had just put the final nail in the coffin. Blake was never going to be the man I wanted him to be. He was never going to be the father I had hoped he could be. And I was done waiting for him to change. I was done hoping that somehow we could put everything back together. I walked out of Dawn's office with the signed papers in my hands, feeling the weight of the decision on my shoulders. I had made the right choice. I knew that. But I couldn't ignore the hollow feeling in my chest, the way it still hurt to think about the life I had lost. Later that evening, after I had picked up our daughter from Blake's house and gotten her settled in for the night, I sat on the couch in the living room, holding the final divorce papers in my hands. I looked at them for a long time, tracing the words with my finger. They were final. They were real. But they didn't bring me the sense of closure I had expected. I thought about everything we had been through, the love, the promises, the broken trust. And I thought about how much I had changed in the process. I wasn't the same woman I had been when I first married Blake. I wasn't the same woman who had blindly believed in our love. I had fought for my marriage, fought for our family, but in the end, it was clear that the fight wasn't just against Blake. It was against the version of myself I had been. The woman who had been willing to accept so little, who had let Blake's selfishness tear her down. I wasn't that woman anymore. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of it all settle into me. I had come through the fire. I had rebuilt myself from the wreckage of my past. I wasn't perfect. I still had scars. I still had moments where I wondered if I had done the right thing. But I was learning to forgive myself, to accept that I had done what was necessary to protect my daughter and myself. When I heard the doorbell ring, I stood up, startled. For a moment, I wondered if it was Blake. But when I opened the door, I was surprised to see Jenny standing there, holding a bottle of wine and a small bag of takeout. "Celebration time," she said, grinning as she stepped inside. "I figured you could use a little company tonight." I smiled and let her in, feeling a sense of warmth I hadn't expected. Jenny had been there for me when I needed someone to lean on, when everything felt like it was falling apart. And tonight, she was the one who reminded me that I wasn't alone. We sat on the couch together, eating takeout, sipping wine, and talking about everything and nothing. It wasn't about Blake. It wasn't about the divorce. It was just about May. About what I had gone through, and what I was learning to leave behind. When we finished the wine, Jenny looked at me seriously. "You've come so far," she said softly. "I'm proud of you. And I'm proud of the way you've taken control of your life. I know it's not easy, but you're doing it." I nodded, feeling a lump rise in my throat. "I don't feel strong all the time," I admitted. "I feel like I'm falling apart just as much as I feel like I'm rebuilding. But I know I'm doing the right thing. For me, for her." Jenny smiled and squeezed my hand. "And you're not alone in this. You never have been." That night, as I got ready for bed, I took a moment to look at my daughter as she slept in her crib, Her tiny hands curled around her stuffed animal. I thought about everything I had been through. The pain, the betrayal, the loneliness. But I also thought about how much stronger I was now. How much I had grown. The past few months had been hell, but they had also been a rebirth. I wasn't the same woman who had let Blake tear her down. I wasn't the same woman who had accepted his excuses and his selfishness. I was meh. And for the first time in a long time, I knew that was enough.